Well, last night at an event in New York City, our colleague Alex Wagner asked New York Attorney General Tish James how developments in the classified documents case, how this new federal criminal indictment of Trump in Florida might affect her trial, which again is scheduled for later this year. Watch what she said.
The special counsel has asked for a speedy trial for this. Is this going to intersect with your case at all? How is everybody going to manage the calendar here?
So in all likelihood, I believe that my case, as well as DA Bragg and the Georgia case, will unfortunately have to be adjourned pending the outcome of the federal case. So it all depends upon the scheduling of this particular case.
Attorney General of New York essentially predicting that all of the state cases against former President Trump will, quote, have to be adjourned pending the outcome of the federal classified documents case, which is now going to trial in Florida. That seems like a big deal. What does it mean exactly, though? Does this apply to all state cases, criminal and civil? Does it preclude court action in any of those cases or just trials? Also, is this just boilerplate? Is this just customary to defer to federal prosecutions? Is this a matter that is mandatory? Is this a matter of law? For example, should we expect the Georgia prosecutor, Fani Willis, to hold off bringing indictments this summer now on account of the federal case? Or could she bring the indictments and just delay the trial because of the federal case? To hear from their side, neither. Fani Willis's office telling a local Atlanta TV station today, quote, the federal indictments will not have any impact on the Fulton County election investigation. Well, I have many, many questions. Alex Wagner, you were the one who elicited this remarkable statement from the Attorney General. How do you understand what that means?
I've spent a fair amount of time, Rachel, on the telephone trying to get some answers. And what is clear here is there's not been a time in American history when a person has been facing so much legal peril on so many different fronts. And, oh, by the way, was also a former president running a presidential campaign, right? So bear in mind that this is all sort of like legal Star Trek going where no lawyer has gone before. It is customary, is what it sounds like, for state-level prosecutors to basically defer to the feds in terms of scheduling trials. This should not impact...
Scheduling trials, specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
Right? So the charges can still come down, but it sounds like it's more a matter of the trials and scheduling the trials, the calendar of all of that. And there is no hard and fast rule. It is just that federal cases tend to go faster, and so they can be handled in a more efficient manner. And, oh, by the way, also, the information gleaned in a federal trial is fair game for state-level prosecutors. So if you are Letitia James or Alvin Bragg or Fani Willis, there's maybe an advantage in letting Jack Smith go first because you can use whatever information comes out of that trial in your own, right?
So in the New York cases, right, we have two trials scheduled. We have the civil trial scheduled for October, which is very soon.
Yes.
We have the criminal trial scheduled for March.
Yes.
They expect that they are going to be waiting because the federal trial isn't going to happen.
That is what she said. She also named Fani Willis in that group of prosecutors who would sort of stand down. But Fani Willis clearly sounds like she's going to take an aggressive position on this and try in terms of getting this case to trial. Nobody knows what the timing is going to be because that's up to Aileen Cannon. And ultimately, this decision-making rests with the judges in each of these cases. The prosecutors can kind of like wheel and deal behind the scenes and try and get cooperation about who's going to go first and defer to one another. But ultimately, the judges are the ones that set the trial date.
And so that sounds like that's sort of an iterative process, too, right? It may change over time. If Judge Cannon decides this is going to take forever and she sets a sort of schedule that is going to make this go for a long time, the judges in the state cases can be like, oh, we're not waiting for that.
Exactly.
Never mind, we're back on.
Yes. And and Trump's lawyers are going to be making the case that, like, his schedule's insanely busy because he has to go to, various...
Café Versailles.
Go to Versailles, make another speech at Bedminster, whatever it is. And again, we've talked about Aileen Cannon and her various interests and how deferential she's going to be to Trump's defense team. That's going to factor into the staging of the trial as well.
Let me ask also, in terms of Fani Willis today, and again, I don't know if this is anything that you've been able to pursue reporting on today, or I'll ask any of you guys, but Fani Willis is signaling a charging decision. She is not necessarily signaling charges, but they did say publicly today, we sent sheriff's officers to the 2 other places where Donald Trump has just been arraigned after being charged, so we can prep Atlanta, too. I mean, it really seems like they're preparing for the likelihood of charges against Trump. Do we think that she's going to delay that calendar, delay that process, which otherwise seems like it's in motion, if for no other reason, to find out if she's going to get something else out of the federal criminal trial that she might be able to use?
Again, I'm a lay person. I speak neither Latin nor law. But if you look at the Mar-a-Lago case, I mean, if it was Jack Smith moving forward on the January 6th investigation, I think there could be a case to be made, like, maybe let Jack Smith go first.
Because they're very related matters.
Twins.
Yes.
Mar-a-Lago is his own animal. And I will say the expectation from various legal experts I spoke to was like the E. Jean Carroll case is already baked enough, if you will, that could happen regardless of when Jack Smith's case happens. So
I have a reverse question, actually, because then if you're Jack Smith, because now you have to also decide whether you're going to move forward on that second piece of his investigation, which is January 6th. Yeah. Could he benefit, in a sense, from Fani Willis going first? Because then she could establish some facts.
The Feds never defer to the states. Feds never defer to the states.
And they would never back off thinking, well, she's going to handle that part of the process.
The power dynamics are such that there is major, and I would defer in turn to Andrew Weissman on this. The feds are sort of the kings of the hill, and which isn't to undermine the integrity or the tenacity of these state-level prosecutors, but I think Jack Smith would probably be loath to say, I'm going to wait till Fani Willis makes her case.
Well, what happens if they both do January 6th?
Well, they're going to, but the question is the sequencing.
Yes.
Right.
The trials only. Let's actually, rather than talking about Andrew Weissman, let's ask Andrew Weissman. And Steph, I want to hear from you on this as well. But Andrew, are we talking nonsense or are we talking sense?
Please.
So when I heard the Letitia James clip, I was thinking if I were a prosecutor in Alvin Bragg's office, I would have sort of, had my jaw drop to the ground. Just think about the different ways of cutting this. The normal way you would think as who has the case that's first in time, and the person who had the case that's first in time would go, whether it's civil or criminal, whether it's state or federal. Another way of dicing this is a civil case versus a criminal case. And a third way is state versus federal. And you have to start with the presumption that any prosecutor, civil or criminal, state or federal, if they have a strong case, they want to go first because it is to your advantage to have the witnesses, to have the first crack, even just if you're thinking of it just in terms of you put all this work into this case, you don't want to be sort of scooped by somebody else. It's just sort of a standard practice. I was very surprised to hear Letitia James say that not only would her case be deferred, but it would be true for Alvin Bragg's case and Fani Willis's case. So I wasn't surprised to hear Fani Willis say essentially, yeah, not so fast. So I think that there is a history of civil cases deferring to criminal cases. Mm-hmm. And I think that could happen. The counter to that is that Letitia James's case is so far ahead, and there is a scheduled trial date. So unless she misspoke, I actually took that to be a sign of potential weakness in her case, because that just doesn't sound like what you would say if you have a strong civil case that you want to go forward.
And Andrew, does it matter the subject matter of the case? I mean, we've got in this. I mean, as Alex was talking about, there is a criminal case in Georgia that appears to be addressing some of the same issues that the outstanding federal grand jury investigation in Washington on January 6th is addressing. So those are related matters, whereas it would seem that, for example, the E. Jean Carroll civil case or the business records fraud civil case that Tish James was pursuing would be a completely separate matter than the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. And so maybe even though it's the same defendant, the prosecutors and judges involved in those cases might see themselves as operating in parallel separate universes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I totally agree with Alex that when it's so disparate in terms of subject matter, it's just a question of scheduling. I don't think there needs to be a lot of deference. I think it's going to be mostly sort of first in time, in which case is ready. I think the most interesting is going to be the January 6 cases. If you have a Fani Willis case that is really a subset of what Jack Smith would bring, because he would have the Georgia component in his case. It'll be interesting to see who defers to who. That's where, as you alluded to, Rachel, the feds always want to go first, and I think they're going to want to have, I think, a first crack. And the reason for that is if you are a prosecutor, state or federal, you're the one who wants to put those witnesses on first. The defendant has an advantage after they've heard all of the government's case. So the person who goes second tends to have a harder time than the person who goes first. And Jack Smith will have a broader array of evidence simply because he's looking at a broader scope than Georgia, even understanding that the Georgia charges will include some of what happened outside of Georgia. There's no question that what Jack Smith will be putting together will include a far greater extent of the scheme that was laid out by the January 6th committee.
And Andrew, would it be proper and would it be expected that the federal prosecutors working under Jack Smith on the January 6th matter, that they would speak with the state prosecutors looking at January 6th and election interference matters in Georgia? Would the federal and state prosecutors talk to each other? Would that be okay for them to do that?
So certainly it's proper. There's nothing that prohibits it. And certainly with respect to scheduling, you want to do that. So let's just say that you want to interview a victim. You might decide to interview the victim together, the federal and state prosecutors, simply so that the victim doesn't have to go through that process twice, and you're doing this in the most benign fashion. And then I think you would have a collegial discussion about who should go first. And some of that's going to depend on the judge, what prospect there is of one case going sooner than the other. If you have a judge who's really delaying things at the state level, then it'll be clear the feds should go first, and the state prosecutors would presumably defer to that and not be fighting to have a delay in the federal case just to accommodate a slower track. So a lot of this remains to be seen.